Welcome to another episode of Progress Always, where we build the fittest leaders by empowering you to prioritize your health, eliminate stress, and create alignment between your habits and goals. And I've got Dr. Whitney here with me today, founder and lead physician at Quantum Body Optimization, Naturopathic Doctor, applied kinesiologist, certified Neuro-Emotional Technique Practitioner, and lifestyle medicine expert. What's going on, girl? How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. We met at Scottsdale Top Docs. Shout out to that organization. They are spearheading this initiative that I have been genuinely interested in being a part of. Maybe not necessarily putting it together. That's a monumental task all by itself. But getting medical professionals and practitioners such as myself in the physical and the mindset space together to create be force multipliers for each other. And I think that they're doing a really good job in that initiative because when Dr. Tom presented at the last meeting, one of the things that became very obvious to me was, as facilitators of medicine, whether you're on the allopathic or naturopathic side of the house, there seems to be a disconnect in accountability and lifestyle integration in the hereafter once the prescription is given. There just seems to be a lack of, for sure, time and resources to make sure that the patient, the client, adheres to whatever the protocol, which is where somebody like myself could be leveraged at next level to assist with those things. And that's kind of what I saw as he was moving through that presentation, and then being in the room with a lot of those other practitioners. That seemed to be the part that was the biggest hump to get over. Is, here are all the things and here's how I create a relationship with my clients and my patients, and and then there's that accountability, like what happens between this appointment and the next appointment piece, that I just don't have the time and the bandwidth to facilitate. So we'll get into all that in here in a second, but I am genuinely curious in your origin story. How does one find their way into naturopathic medicine to begin with? Because I've not met anyone in your field who, like, in fifth grade was like, I want to be a naturopath.
Yeah. I think I had no idea what a naturopath was actually until I applied to go to school there. So I was really never introduced to that. And I was actually on the track to be an orthopedic surgeon was my the direction that I was going. I always played sports. I was always super active, and I was always injured. So never injured enough quite to have surgery, but I just love the cracking of bones and the, getting people back into their sport or whatever it is. And I had some really, really cool opportunities and internships with orthopedic surgeons that I was like, yes, this is cool. And so I actually, somewhere in the midst of all of that, ended up fracturing and hurting my back, and went from, I was living in California at the time. So I went from CrossFitting to running 5 to 10Ks, playing beach volleyball, working out twice a day, to being bedridden in pain. And no one could do anything for me. So it was, in the allopathic realm, it's like, well, you're not injured enough for surgery. We don't really know what to do for you. Here's a bunch of pain meds, like, good luck, kind of. And I didn't really like taking pain medicine, but I was really, really desperate for some sleep and some relief. I had nerve pain from, basically my belly button down through my feet, and it didn't touch the pain. And so I was like, well, what else? The only other option was exploratory surgery. And I was like, well, that sounds like a terrible idea if you have no idea what you're going in for. So I was actually working for a chiropractor at the time. And I had always grown up around chiropractic, was the only kind of holistic side of medicine that I was ever introduced to. And so fortunately, all the patients would come in every day, and I didn't miss a beat of work. I went to work every day, even though I'm out of my mind in pain. And they started giving me all these recommendations, like acupuncture and craniosacral and this whole other world of stuff that I had never been introduced to. And I was like, I don't care what any of this is, just give me something. give me something. So I dove in head first into the alternative medicine world. And it took a really long time for my body to get better, but I was seeing progress. So I was already out for probably a solid year before I started doing that, maybe 6 months. But I was seeing changes and I knew that my body was actually healing. Whereas, pain meds, they're just covering up the symptom of pain, but they weren't really doing anything for my body. So that kind of plunged me into that whole world. And then again, somewhere in the midst of that, I was introduced to the school out here. And a couple years later, I think it was almost two or 3 years later, well, maybe 2 years later, I actually ended up going to school there. And then still on my pain journey, through there, I was introduced to all of these things that finally released my pain. And then I spent all of my time outside of school, which was not a lot of time, every weekend, learning all the modalities that helped me. So anything that was helpful in my journey, I was like, I have to learn this to help people. I have to learn this. And so I have all of this extra certifications and education outside of medical school that really, it allowed me to, one, not only heal my own body, but put everything people need in the same position I was in one place. Instead of having to see, I was seeing tons of different practitioners for every little thing. And so that's so my practice is very personal in that sense, is that everything that I do with patients is something that I've personally had a really great experience with on my health journey.
That's awesome. I'm a huge fan of the integrative approach. That was a lot of the impetus for the way that we interact with our clients at Next Level, in that, a need that we saw was so many of our clients were seeing, us for fitness, a nutritionist, somebody for mindset, so on and so forth down the line. And what I found to be a roadblock in their respective journeys was, as soon as I reach out to the nutritionist, they don't want to have a conversation, or they're really hard to get a hold of. And how are we supposed to serve our clients best if we don't know what you're prescribed? Because to have the client articulate what,
Right.
prescription from either direction, from me or another coach, became really challenging, because now we're just playing a game of telephone. They're communicating what they think they understand, right?
Mm.
And when that comes back in the form of, well, I think my macros are supposed to look like this, or I'm supposed to be having this much, and that, whatever. It just became like a real pain in terms of optimizing the results that they were on their way to achieving. So we took that head on and brought a lot of that stuff under one roof. So they're only having one conversation, as opposed to, 17 different that may or may not be in alignment with where they actually want to go. So I really appreciate the fact that you leverage your own personal journey to create exposure to all these other modalities, and then pursued that as an additional expertise to bring into your practice. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I see that all the time, right? They're going to everyone, but there's no quarterback. There's no one actually overseeing everything to see what's going on. And so the body also, like, we're missing things because everyone's kind of staying in their lane and doing these things, but there's no one overseeing, like, how is this person actually doing on all of this stuff? Or does it all make sense? And so I find that I end up actually playing the quarterback a lot of the time. And, I have no problem referring people. I have no problem when they see other people. It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't fit. What's the missing link here? And are they making progress? Because when we check in, we're like, well, how are you actually doing with this? Like, do you feel like you're getting better? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm just doing it because I think I'm supposed to be doing it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's find something that is really going to actually move the needle for you, or how do we leverage this so that you're actually benefiting from the time and energy, money that you're putting into it.
100%. 100%. Did you find that it was ultimately the compounding of all of these modalities that led to your healing, or was there one that was like, no, that's it. That fat, we identified it. That was the thing. That's, was it acupuncture or any of the craniosacral? Like, what was it? A modality or the combination of all of it that just got you to heal?
Well, I think my healing kind of went in phases. So initially when I first started, I was back in Colorado. So I was only exposed to a couple different things. And so I did a ton of acupuncture. I did some cold laser therapy. I was doing massage. So I was doing a lot of different things that I think compounded together. I think acupuncture was the most significant in terms of making any progress. But when I came to school, to start naturopathic school, on the first day of orientation, they come in and they teach us about all these clubs and different things like that. And one of my classmates was like, hey, do you want to take this applied kinesiology class? I was like, I don't know what that is, but my undergrad was in kinesiology. So I was like, yeah, that sounds good, whatever. So I was like, can I just like show up for the first week and then like if I like it, I'll pay the rest of it? Because it was a really big commitment. It was like 8 or 9 weekends, one per month for 8 or 9 months. And at like lunchtime on the first session, I was like, who do I pay my money to? Because I did not know what was happening, but I was like, this is how people are going to heal. And then I found a doctor who did apply kinesiology. He treated me one time, and I had a lot of like residual pain. I was active again and I was working out again, but I just still had a lot of pain. He treated me one time. My pain flared for like 5 days and it was gone. And I was like, okay, like I'm on to something here. This really changed my life. I have to learn this. And so that's what put me onto kinesiology, is because it is a system. It's a system that allows us to connect the body in every possible way that we can't even conceptualize in our brain. And so when we learn the thing about medicine and these different modalities, different certifications we all have, everyone again stays in their lane, and we learn the body separate. Every system we learn separately, how we diagnose it is separately, and how we treat it is separately. But no piece, part, cell, organ system in our body works separately. They all work together and they all influence each other. And so we're doing a huge disservice by having all these specialties. Like we just talked about, is like, if we have all these specialties, no one are seeing the whole organism, the whole body, and how it's all working together. And applied kinesiology puts that together. So we're working with the meridian systems, we're working with the nervous system, we're working with, we have what's called the triad of health. And so that is the physical body, the biochemical body, and the emotional body. And so we're able to view the body as a whole. So when I release an emotion, when I, fix a muscle, the ripple effect of that is going to impact the organ system. It's going to impact the emotions. It's going to impact the physical body. And so that's where we really truly see the healing. And so for me, that really it's just mind blowing to know that how little we know the body. And I'm amazed every single day by the impact things have across the board and that ripple effect. So that really sent me in that direction. And then my least favorite part about healing was emotions. I was one of those people, especially when you come from athletics, right? Like I was always the captain of the team. And so I had to be the least emotional person on the court, right? And so I took on everyone else's emotions. I didn't know how to process my own, and that led into my life. And so I was like, oh, well, yeah, I knew there's this emotional part, but I didn't really want to deal with it. Didn't know how to deal with it. So the next phase of that healing threw me into neuro-emotional technique, which was the mind-body connection of how do we release and address these stress patterns and these emotions that keep us stuck in pain and keep us stuck in these old patterns. And being able to release those took my healing to a whole nother level. So it kind of went in phases, but one kind of led to the next in terms of that.
Yeah, it's very much, and I'm so happy that you put it that way. It's very much a layered approach. It's not that in healing one issue you expose another. But you have to deal with things in succession. To your point, nothing happens in isolation, and at the same time, you can't do it all at once.
Right. Which is
Right.
all what we want, right? We're just like, just
Hmm.
get rid of this. And so like I always tell people the body heals in layers. And like you said, like we have to heal what the body's ready to heal. I talk about it like an onion. So when we have to peel back the layers of the onion, and within every layer is physical, emotional, and biochemical aspect of that layer. The emotions we want to bypass. We're really good at the physical. Get a massage, poke it, inject it, crush it with a foam roller, like whatever crazy thing we're doing. We're really good at that, but we're not so good at the other things. So we have to dress all for that layer to release. Sometimes they go quickly. Sometimes we have to spend a little more time. But when you cut an onion, it makes you cry, right? So when we adjust a bone that's not ready to be adjusted, you're going to be in more pain, right? So we have to undo the body. It's kind of like, I think of it, when we had telephones and we had those old cords, when they get all tightened and they start like going up, that's what happens to our nervous system. And so to unwind it, we have to unwind it the way it got wound up in the first place. So that's where the patient healing comes in, because we can't just cut into the middle of it and expect everything to be better.
Yeah. You have to, in that physical realm, a very standard logical practice. Let's get you out of pain. Let's get back range of motion. Let's get back to
No pain, no
function.
gain.
And then we can start playing with load and intensity and duration and all those things. Take that crawl, walk, run approach. And, when you're talking about the physical, biochemical, and emotional, it's a really interesting when you take that approach per layer, right? That's so interesting. So in your practice, what are, if emotions are the part of the deal that people have the most challenge, it sounds like they have the most challenge with, because it's not necessarily tangible in the way that it is, getting a knot out of your back or putting a rib back in place or making the sniffles go away. What does that look like?
So it actually shows up very tangible. So with applied kinesiology and NET, we use the tool of muscle testing, which is a response from your nervous system. So if we're looking at, like if someone is having, like I had a patient here was having trouble squatting. They were like, I can tell that my glute is not engaging, and then it's messing up their whole kinetic chain. And so I'm like, okay, let's test it. So we can test the individual muscles. So one glute was firing, one was not. And then I can test and evaluate, does it need physical correction? Does it need biochemical connection? So every organ system or every muscle is related to an organ system. So the glutes are related to hormones, and then emotionally. So when I'm looking for, okay, if that muscle is testing weak, what's going to make it strong? So I'll go through all of those, and will find. So we have emotional points on our forehead here. So I have people just put their hand on their forehead, which is telling the nervous system that we're implying the stimulus of emotion, and that strengthens that muscle. Then I know, well, there's an emotion related to that muscle. We clear the emotion. The cool part is, we have no idea how this will happen, but when it's really cool is when we clear the emotion and the muscle turns on, because there is a neurological disconnect. That emotion is playing in that muscle. So then we clear the emotion, the muscle turns on, and we're like, okay, well, that was a great fix, right? Other times the emotion will, again, it's part of that layer. We lift the layer, then the body wants the physical or biochemical correction for that. So a lot of people will be like, oh, well, I've been doing PT and I've been trying to strengthen this. Like, you cannot strengthen a muscle that is not neurologically facilitated. I don't care how many times you try to fire it, it's not going to fire. And so if emotion is the reason why that muscle's not firing, you're going to spend a lot of time wasted trying to strengthen a muscle that neurologically, like I'll be like, okay, try to use this muscle, or we'll go through the motion, and their brain is like, yeah, I'm trying, but because there's a disconnect, they can't do it. So even if you're trying to engage this glute while you're doing a step up or whatever you're doing, you can try all day long, but if that's not the reason why that muscle's not firing, we're not going to make the progress. So it shows up physically like that is when we can say, okay, well, we'll test an emotion, and all of a sudden now you're really strong. It's like, okay, that solidifies that for people, because again, emotions are kind of like, I don't really deal with it, or like it's a can of worms, and like, where do I even start? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so NET is a really quick system. It takes like 2 minutes that we're able to identify the, Dr. Walker says there's 2 things in life, love and money. Those are the 2 things that dictate our life, right? Money, job, career, finances, and biggest stressor, and then all kinds of relationships. And then the last part is you and all the roles that you play. And so we identified the situation, we identify the organ system. It uses acupuncture to identify the emotion. We clear it out in minutes and we move on. So it ends up being like this really quick thing. But I would say I see emotion. I spend more time playing on emotions than I do fixing anything else.
Yeah.
They'll allow the physical body to just do what it's supposed to do and heal.
Do you think it's emotions facilitate a subconscious malfunction, like the operating system is preoccupied with this thing in the periphery, so that your conscious efforts are inhibited or distracted in some kind of way? Is that an oversimplification of what we're talking about?
It's a little different than that. So yes, when we're working on the subconscious mind, because a lot of times stuff will come up and people will be like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know anything about you. Like, I don't know, right? Like your nervous system, like if you've ever read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, or we say the issues are in the tissues. So,
Yep.
And within applied kinesiology, we say that anything can cause anything. And so emotions are one of those things. So when you get an injury, and it doesn't have to be a major injury, it can be like you just lifted a little too heavy or wrong and you strained a muscle. It's going to neurologically disconnect that from the brain, and whatever happens in that moment. So we'll say, if you're stressed out and distracted with work or family or whatever's going on, maybe you get an injury, like you're hiking and you roll your ankle. All of these stressors are going to be like, how am I going to get off this mountain? Now my ankle hurts and now I'm not going to be able to work out anymore. We run all of those scenarios. And so there's so many factors of why, and the emotion also doesn't have to be, most of the time, it's not even connected to the actual incident. And so emotions just play a role of being able to stick in our tissues. And so there's not really always a rhyme or reason as to why, but those stressors are what we call like unresolved stress patterns. So when we evolve any kind of emotion or stress, it should just go right through. We should be able to integrate it and move on with our life. But because the emotions are physiological, that's when they get stuck in the tissues. And so when we talk about physiology, it's, when you get in like a heated argument, someone, you get hot, you get sweaty, your heart rate, and you get all like amped up, right? Time passes and you deal with it, whatever. You go home and you're telling your spouse or your friend about it, and you're getting worked up again, just like you were originally. Your brain does not know the difference between the actual stressor that you're experiencing it and the second time you're telling the story. Your body's experiencing it the same way. So that physiology is what gets stuck in the pattern. So when there's another thing that happens, another emotion, another event that happens that ignites that same physiology, even though it's completely unrelated event, it'll get stuck to that. And so they just kind of like, I kind of think of them as like a spider web, and they just kind of build and build and build. And so when our goal with NET is to help neutralize it, so that it's no longer like this static ball that's attaching to all this physiology. So when we neutralize the original event where it started, it collapses the spider web. And that's where we see the biggest healing, because it's going vertically, horizontally, diagonally all through the system, and it's connected to a bunch of different things. So that's why it's hard to really dictate like what emotion or why. We just know that it's stuck there, and when we release it, it changes things across the board, because that physiology is what's gonna impact the nervous system, which is going to impact the emotion or the muscle and all of that. If that makes sense.
No, for sure. So if your only exposure to healing in general is Western medicine, allopathic medicine, I'm going to urgent care or Mayo to get my prescription, and you hear what you just told me for the first time, that shit sounds crazy. How, like, is that a fight that you have to fight? Is that, how are you educating and getting yourself and these modalities out there, again, not necessarily against, but above the noise of the mainstream? Because like, I'm your biggest fan. I love everything about the naturopathic perspective. And still it seems like you guys as a community and a profession are working uphill in a lot of ways to be adopted as the first line of defense in terms of somebody's healing journey.
Yeah. Yes, it's a battle on all sides. And I am aware that I don't treat like the rest of the naturopaths. So I'm even extra weird on the side here. And unfortunately for all of us is that we are the last line. It's like people have tried all the things. They've either been hurt by it, they haven't been well, they've had a bad experience, and then they start to look elsewhere and they turn to alternative medicine, natural medicine. And so it is an uphill battle for all of us every way. I think I've been really fortunate to be really confident and sound in what I know to be true and how the body's healing. And I'm able to put it into terms that, I don't usually use all the neurological facilitational words when I'm describing it. But when people start to understand, I think now there's kind of a revolution. Like, people are looking for something different. They've been in this very passive pill for every ill type of situation. They're not getting better. They want something different. They want a better quality of life. And so people, I just have to keep saying what I'm saying. And I've been fortunate that the right people are showing up at my door. They're like, I don't know what you're doing, but it sounds like something I need. And when they're in my office, being able to demonstrate and for them to experience muscle testing and what I'm finding, and I'm able to find stuff that they knew they had, but no one else could find. Or I'm able to connect the dots between, the people that are told, like, well, your labs are fine. And then they're like, well, I don't feel fine. So how is that possible? And those people just feel like they're going crazy and it's all in their head. I'm able to look at their labs and look at their body and be like, no, here's what's happening, right? And so it's just building that trust, and, talking about it is really difficult because it is really hard to explain, and it does sound crazy. But fortunately for NET is we have a really big research foundation, and they've been spending a lot of time and money in the past 30 years actually trying to prove how NET works. And so we have a lot of research behind it. They're doing functional MRI testing. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but so this way. So we can see when someone thinks about a stressor, it shows up in different parts of their brain as this in the red, right? This was one of the first studies they did on cancer patients. They did 8 sessions of NET around the stressor, and down here you can see it's gone. So this is like physical proof that we know that we're making a change in the brain. And so having research like this is also helpful because we can say, okay, yes, this mind-body connection, all we know is that people are getting a lot better, but now we have the proof to show people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you have an answer for someone and someone can get better, they don't really care about the process, which is not, because I get hung up in the process, right? Because I'm like, these things are so cool and I geek out so hard, and like I'm always surprised every day by the things that I find, and my patients are always like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, when they get better, and when someone, I have long visits, so when someone takes the time, listen to them and walk them through it, and like the accountability, like you said, like I'm constantly following up and changing their life, right? It's forcing them to take action and accountability in their life, which gets them results, and no one's ever done that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is. And I'm gonna challenge something you said. I don't think what you do is hard to explain. It is just so different compared to the song that has been sung for so long that people have to hear it a lot to really embrace it as an option.
We've always been
So
told the body's separate, right? So they're like, oh, well, you can help me with this. I don't have to go to a specialist for this. And I'm like, no, because your body's connected, right? So it's like we just don't know. And so for the longest time, we've just been told that everything is separate, and this is what you do for it, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Drobot at the Biomed Center. Do you know who he is?
I don't know.
Really, really good friend of mine. He's out here in Scottsdale as well. I'll get you guys connected. He's not a car guy, but he is the master of car analogies. And the way he describes the naturopathic side of the house is, you guys are mechanics. You're not carburetor specialists, right? That doesn't exist in the world of automotive. Right. You take the vehicle, the system, as you described it, to the mechanic, the naturopath, who looks at it, takes their diagnostic approaches. How is the whole thing working together? And then isolating, to your point about physical, biochemical, or emotional, and takes that systematic approach based on how everything is interacting with each other. You don't go to the carburetor specialist to have your car looked at when it's active, when the check engine light comes on, And I think that's a really good analogy for how you describe what you do, the way that you do it. That made it the easiest for me to understand anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in naturopathic school, that is are like, we treat the whole person to get to the root cause, right? So it's, mind, body, soul, and then apply kinesiology to make it, that much deeper of being able to connect all the physical body. So, like I said, like I'm always surprised how quickly people get better when you just give the body what it needs. And we get out of the way. Like as humans, we as default are standing in our own way in all different manners of action or inaction. And so when you give the body what it needs, it can heal itself. And that's the most, I think healing is actually pretty simple. We've just made it really complicated because no one's overseeing the actual body. We're just taking apart the pieces and trying to put them back together where they don't go.
Yeah. I want to take it back to the last time we were in the same room at Scottsdale Top Docs listening to Dr. Todd's, I forget his last name. I just remember his first name was Todd. Dr. Todd's presentation when he was had unpacked a lot of what we're talking about and wanted to introduce it inside the system for accountability and taking a more holistic approach and managing nutrition and hydration and physical activity and recovery and all of those things that happen outside of the hospital setting that we as individuals are all responsible for in our own upkeep and healing and performance. He's like, we could do that here. And if we did that, we would spend less money on stints and boom, boom, boom. He just went down this list of all these things that would go away if they implemented these programs under the umbrella of the hospital. And the response he got from the powers that be was, well, isn't everything you're trying to get rid of how we make money? Do you remember that part of his presentation?
Yeah.
What went through your mind? What were you feeling when he was moving through that part of the presentation?
I mean, I think I was probably one of the few people in the room that none of that was a surprise, right? Like, I'm on the other side of medicine. I already hear all that. I already, knew that going, we hear that every day from our patients, and we know that that's the reason why we do stuff differently. But we also have to remember, like, the system is out to make money. It's not to make you healthy. The hospitals, the insurance companies, big pharma, all of those things are connected, and it's a system, and that's why it's so hard to break. So even when we're doing the work that you and I are doing, we're like, here's how you get healthy, here's the lifestyle stuff that is going to move the needle. It requires action and intention, and people have to do the work. When you're in the system, you don't have to do the work. You show up once a year, you get a medication. They don't tell you anything else about it. You show up the next year and your dose goes up, and you do that year after year after year until you qualify to have surgery. So is that, I think, is a really hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, especially when they've, once they've experienced it and understood it. That's why they're in our, working with us. But yeah, it wasn't surprising because, I see that, and I see that on the side of the naturopathic side. Like, everything's a business, everything's making money. So, what is your intention? How are you serving people? How can you help them in the best way? And I think education is the biggest thing that we can offer people in that sense. But yeah, it wasn't too surprising to me that he got that pushback, which is unfortunate, right? But that's why that's why we can help people the way we can. So
for sure. So if we're not gonna, slap everybody with a conspiracy theory to facilitate this education that we're so aggressively pursuing for our people, because that seems to be the one that's like, ooh, now I'm listening. Let me put on my tinfoil hat with you, and let's explore what's really going on with Monsanto and big pharma and blah, 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 blah. Right, so on and so far down the rabbit hole we go.
Right.
What's a different, or dare I say, better approach to open the dialogue with people, knowing that we don't control their response to these intentions whatsoever? But what have you found to be a successful approach that isn't, indulging in conspiracy theory to get people to open their minds and their hearts to this real issue of personal responsibility and accountability?
Yeah. I really actually try to not feel like, you'll never find any of that in my content or anything like that, because I don't like to add to the polarization of all of that.
You're not going to fear monger?
No. And I made a point to not do that since, over the past few years, because it doesn't really matter where you stand on anything. It's like, you have to do the work to be healthy. Like, the world is sick. Our food is sick. Like, we have to work really hard and intentionally to be healthy. And so I always just remind people, that they are in control. And by even the smallest actions, people start to feel better. And so a lot of it, I'm seeing is there's a lot of nervous system dysregulation, but there's a lot of, we're just going through the motions of life. We're all caught up in this world that is not allowing the human body to function optimally, and we're feeling it. Right. And so ultimately it comes down to that, is like, how are you living every day that's contributing to the way you feel? And how do we put you back in touch with the human that you've been so disconnected from, because we're just go, or, just the way societies that we've played in this game to create this thing. So I think it's really just, spend a lot of time talking people off that ledge of everything that's going on and being so polarized, and just reminding them that they do have control, and the things that they do have control over, and how that's going to impact their healing. And that's where I see, I don't give a lot of supplements. I do a lot of body work with all of the techniques that I do, and I put a lot back on my patients. Like, here's the lifestyle things, like, here's what you have to do intentionally every day that puts you back in the driver's seat. And giving them that sense of control, I think, is really, really powerful. And then also the knowledge of what they're doing and how it's contributing to it and why they're doing it. Because if people don't understand why, we're not going to do it, right? So we have to educate on why we need to do these, how we're going to do it, make it sustainable for them. But giving them back that control, I think, is the biggest thing that they're like, oh, wow, I don't have to be on the roller coaster and this, like, this wheel of like just nonstop, and I just feel terrible. Like, this doesn't have to be my life. And people want that. They need that. And that's, I think, ultimately what they're seeking is like, how do I get my life back?
Yeah.
And
so
the driver's seat.
So what I'm hearing from you is very counter to the narrative that society's becoming so lazy and so sedentary, and passing the buck to the system to manage care for themselves. When they get in front of you, it sounds like that thing that the big narrative says that they don't want is exactly what they're looking for. That autonomy, that control, the getting back in the driver's seat, as you put it. So if that's what they really want, why is the perception otherwise?
That's not what they want. That's what they need, right? So that's where the communication comes in, is like, no one's walking into my office being like, flip my life upside down and like tell me how I need to do all the things that I'm not doing, right? But I always say, I'm like, if you're doing the same thing every day and you're feeling so terrible, you literally need to do the opposite. And so I think that's the challenge, though, is like, some people walk into my office and they always, I just want you to fix me. And I'm like, I'm not the healer. I'm the guide. I'm just getting information from your body. I'm getting all the information, but this is all up to you. Like, I'm not here to fix you because you're not broken. You're just disconnected. I'm just remind you how to be a human and what it looks like. And so, and some people don't want to take accountability. They don't want to take those actions to come back, right? Though they're not ready. So it's really meeting people where they're at. Again, explain, sometimes you have to have the same conversation week after week and month after month until they start to get it on their own, which is okay because they're still showing up and they still want change. And so I really work on just connecting the dots for people of like, okay, well, I learned that I can't tell you that here's all of the things it's going to take to get your health back in line, because people are like, well, that's too much work. I don't want to do that. Right. And it's really, and I'm like, okay, well, let's connect the dots. Like, maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're overstimulated and your nervous system is dysregulated, which is why your hormones are out of whack and your brain can't function, all of these things, right? And people are like, oh, so I'm not lazy. I'm overstimulated. So then that leads them down a different path, right? It's like, or it's not your hormones, right? Everyone's seeking the quick fixes, right? There's actually, other things happening. And so just being able to connect the dots for them really allows them to start to come around and make those choices instead of us like throwing it in their face.
So when you
should be doing,
for sure. So when they come into your office and let you get under the proverbial hood and you see this laundry list of dysregulation, was there a point in the beginning where you were like, holy shit, these are all the things that are wrong with you. Let's push the panic button together and pursue overwhelm. And then as your practice evolved, you're like, you know what? Maybe they don't need to know all that right now. I'm just going to tell them the first thing we need to work on. And once that becomes consistent and connected, then we'll move on to the next thing. And you started taking that layered approach. How has the evolution of your practice been? Because I remember when I was a young trainer, I used to go ham with my clients because they wanted the hardest workout ever. And and here I am fresh out of football, like, hell yeah, let's rock. And here I am 25 years later. I'm like, absolutely not. We definitely we're not going to play that game, right? So how's the evolution of your practice been, having the experience as such a comprehensive client and patient prior to becoming the professional and the expert?
Yeah, I think I was always on the same page too. Like I was very black and white. It was like, here's what you have to do like, here's the things you have to do. If you don't do this, like, then that's all, and then you learn that you have to meet people where they're at. And so people right now are just, we have a lot of stuff going on all the time. So it feels always very overwhelming, and people want the diagnosis. They want to know, they do want to know everything. They ask me all the time, and I'm like, nope, we're just going to start here because this is kind of the overarching thing, right? And so I do a full applied kinesiology exam. I look at every aspect that I can gather, and I sit down and I make a plan for them, and I lay it kind of out in pillars of like, what's your complaint and what I think is going on. And they're grouped into bigger things so that it doesn't seem like we're not chasing the symptoms, we're chasing the system, and we're treating the body as a whole. And so ultimately that's what I'm seeing, is that I'm seeing all of this nervous system dysregulation. So people don't have really specific diagnoses. Their body is just not operating well. So how do we attack that? Lifestyle medicine, maybe a few supplements to start, and NET. And not everyone's ready for NET either. And so, sometimes that's a system that we build to that I'm like, okay, well, I've had to fix your knee 3 times now, and you don't want to clear the emotion. Finally, they're like, all right, fine. Like, it keeps showing up, right? Like, the body wants this to be healed. So, they kind of start to give into that, and then they're like, oh, okay. But I think, I think over time, I've just realized, especially when it comes to nutrition, really hard, really polarized subject, very emotional. Food is so emotional for us. So, it's getting away from the super strict, the keto and the carnivores. And, it's like, how do we make this sustainable for you over time? Gonna see improvement. So just working on more anti-inflammatory. I stick to more of like a paleo approach, so that it's doable, because we just need a win under our belt.
Yeah.
Instead of having everyone asks for the really stuff, but I always ask them, I'm like, do you feel like you can handle this? Is that something that you have the capacity within your day? You just told me how overwhelmed you are. Like, do you have the capacity to do this? Because it's going to be really hard work. And that's not necessary for us to move the needle.
Mm.
So people also feel a sense of relief, I think, sometimes, knowing they don't have to do all of these extreme things to get better.
Yeah.
So yeah, just, I think working with people, we just unlearn all those things that we're like, okay, yeah, this doesn't actually, like, for us, we're like all or nothing people. So that's just like what we knew and what we did, and we got the results. But like not everyone's the same. And some people do need the wins, right? So I'm like, we're either going to attack this head on or do one thing at a time. You do one thing at a time, it's going to take longer, but it's more important to know what kind of person you are to reach success. So if you're an all or nothing person, let's dive in. If not, that's totally fine. But no, it's just going to take a little more time if we do this stepwise. But as long as you get the wins, they actually move a lot more. They move more quickly through things because you're giving them in doses which they can handle and be successful at. So again, it doesn't matter what kind of person they are. But I think, taking the edge off the polarization of everything actually meets people where they are, and they can find more success in that.
Yeah. You said something, and I'm interested in your opinion on this. You said food is so emotional for us. Why does that dynamic exist, in your opinion?
I think that no matter where you come from in the world, right, is that food is family, food is connection, right? we're so obsessed with the type of food we eat for Thanksgiving and that we eat for Christmas. And there's this one thing my grandma makes every year for Christmas, and I know it's full of gluten and dairy and all of these things, and I don't care. I just have to eat it because that's the only time of year I get to eat it, right? And we celebrate with friends over drinks and, you know, and food. And so it's such this, like, so much of this connection for us that we feel like, well, if I can't indulge in this emotional connection with people or over this thing, or being able, if I have to choose differently, it's going to mess up the reason that I'm here. When really it's like the people that you're with matter more ultimately, but like there's just so much emotion connect, because that's what connects us to things. I think it's really, I don't know. I think the other side of that is that when we eat all the food that's in front of us and that we're sharing with people, we're all on the same level, and we all connect that way. When you choose to do something differently, you put yourself at risk of being rejected from that group or from that connection. Because when you choose something differently, you're going to push up against everyone else's stuff. Like the reason why they can't do a diet, the reason why, you know, they struggle with stuff. So you're faced with their projections, and the people closest to us are always our hardest critics because they don't want you to change. So if you do something a little bit different, that fear and that rejection, which is innate in us, right? Survival, we need human connection to survive. So if we get rejected because we're choosing to be a little different and we can't eat grandma's cookie, or we're choosing not to, right? Not that we can't, but we're choosing not to because we're staying on track with our goals, then we're going to hear about it from everyone of why we're not doing that. So it's easier to eat it and forgo ourselves for that type of thing. So I think it's become such a connective and such a survival piece that our spouses, our kids, our families, our friends, we get rejected when we choose differently. And you have to really be solid in the direction you want to go to be able to withstand that difference. And that makes sense.
How do you prepare a client for that? I'll call it potential rejection, because I don't want to be so dogmatic as to say that that's a guarantee.
Sure.
Right. But what are some of the things that you do with your people to prepare them for that potential so that they're able to, because we are literally talking about a moment. Very rarely are you like raked over the coals for this decision or burnt at the stake with a scarlet letter. That's not what we're talking about. We're literally talking about a moment, a comment, like nothing in the grand scheme of life that derails a person, but still has that moment, that comment has massive implications if we're not prepared for it. And I feel like that's where a lot of people get derailed. They get blindsided by these things because they didn't see those reactions coming, those projections coming. And to your point, not everybody's readily on board with you being your best self, right? So
yeah.
that's the longest way I know how to ask that question. What do you do to prepare your clients for that part of the journey?
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't, I would say I hear about that the most, of how we're, conflicting with it. So, I always remind them that, to stay the course with their goals, that a lot of times those projections are of other people, right? We want to know people, we want to feel comfortable with them. So when someone changes, our first reaction is going to be like, oh, well, why are you doing that? Or to give you a hard time about it. And I ask them, like, well, what is your goal here? What is the point of you choosing to make these changes? So the more that they feel confident in the reason why they're doing what they're doing, then we'll put in scenarios of like, okay, well, if someone has this comment, how are we going to navigate it? Because I oftentimes explain what's the most simple, straightforward thing that you can say that just kind of ends the conversation, or invites conversation, versus it building up as conflict. And so we just kind of navigate that of, you know, in terms of what they're kind of dealing with. And then I remind them that, you know, you can only control yourself. So you're making these choices for yourself, and that you lead by example. Like, I've ran across this my whole life too. And so I'll give them, you know, examples that I've experienced. But the more that I can stand in my choices and, you know, and be confident in that and lead by example, and all of a sudden I'm feeling better and I'm sleeping better, then people start asking questions. They get more curious instead of, you know, the dogma of like the yes or no, or you should do this, you should do that. But I think the most important thing for us to remember is we can't control other people. And that if we lead by example, then they get curious and they'll, you know, ask you questions, and then they'll, you know, can start navigating that, working their own stuff regarding, you know, whatever. We always get resistance when there's change. That's just has been human nature. And you know, that's a natural thing. It's just, how do we stay the course within that resistance, and bring people in? So it's just like what we talked about before. You can't force people to want to do stuff. So the more we can connect the dots for them and just lay it out for them, they can ask questions, and then you're just going to have less issues when it comes. They just respect your decision and give you less of a hard time about it.
Yeah, it seems very much in line with when people start to experience the benefits of our leaders forum and the mindset end of what we do at Next Level. And they're like, oh my God, you know, I've been trying to get my friend in here, you know, like, stop forcing them to do shit. You know, your intent is to bring them in, but all you're doing is pushing them away.
Right.
And to your point, if you just be those changes, whatever they may be, you know, and you just start walking taller, being more confident, you know, sleeping better, looking better, attracting better. Like, when they're ready, they'll ask the right question and they'll end up inviting themselves into the experience. You won't have to try, right? It'll be very minimal effort as long as you stay the course and walk in your truth. That is such a rare and attractive quality. You can't help but get noticed in that regard. And if you, in the beginning, you may bump up against some resistance, but over time, people are like, oh shit, they're serious. Like they're not going back. Okay. Well, so what are you doing again? Tell me more about that thing. And all of a sudden it's just like, where were you? You know, don't judge them. Just be happy that they got there. And then, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's the, you know, like, it's so easy nowadays. Like, I'll always take, you know, if I take a dessert or anything to like a potluck, I always do like the healthy version of it. And like, no one knows any difference. They assume it's different because I'm bringing it. But when they eat it, then they're like, oh, this is actually really good. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have to, it's like cardboard or whatever, you know, back 15 years ago when we all started this, like, we are stuck eating, you know, gross food. But now we don't have to do that. And so then people are like, oh, well, it doesn't have to taste bad to eat healthy. Or I'll always bring a veggie tray. Guess what? The first thing that's gone is the veggie tray.
Yeah.
You know, and so, yeah, it just, that's kind of just volumes too.
Yeah, totally. And at the same time, you know, when you're talking about bringing the healthy alternative, like, this stuff started to come into the consciousness, you know, 15, 20 years ago. And then it was this battle of over processed garbage and also over processed alternatives that taste like absolute trash. And now that we've simplified the alternative, gone back to the way things used to be, right, prior to said processing, and those are entering the mainstream again. It's just like, oh, the healthy thing is just the natural thing, the less preserved thing. Like, oh, the real thing, this tastes amazing, right? Yeah. It's interesting how it's come full circle. It's like Jinko jeans, they're back, you know?
Yeah. Some things things it's okay that they come back. Other things are quite questionable. You know, fashion is always questionable.
I rock Jinkos. I'm like, that's what's up.
Do you have your like stacked in your closet all your old jeans that you can wear again?
That was before I started squatting. I don't fit none of that stuff anymore.
That's funny. Yeah,
Sweatpants,
yeah. I mean, I
sweatpants
think
all day
that's
these days.
the way to keep it is, you know, is just eating real food because when
Mhm.
your palate changes also. So when you start to cut out all that processed food, fruit is actually really sweet for you. So you don't need all
Oh
of this
yeah.
other stuff, right? And you know, eating a good steak, like you're like, holy, this with butter, whatever, you know, like that's really there's so much flavor in real food, and we just have gotten so far away from it. We forget that it doesn't have to taste terrible.
Right, right. Well, Dr. Whitney, you're the absolute best. I'm really happy that we got to connect and have this conversation. Where can our audience find you, connect with you, learn from you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. All of my social is Dr. Whitney Donohue ND. I'm most active on Instagram, and that's pretty much where you'll find me. Instagram's the easiest way.
Cool. Awesome.
I do.
Her handle's right there, Dr. Whitney Donohue, ND. Check her out, connect with her, learn from her. She is a resource for us, which makes her a resource for you. Remember, we're on a mission to build the fittest leaders, empower you to prioritize your health, eliminate stress, and create alignment between your habits and goals. When you're ready to have that conversation, reach out to us at Next Level and let's make that happen. We're happy to join you on your journey. And until next time, guys, progress always.
Thanks.